Good morning. The June 17th, 2020 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting and maintaining health and safety as our nation continues to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Estimates continues to be streamed live virtually. Madam Comptroller, are there any corrections, additions, or deferrals on the agenda?
Yes. On pages 7 through 9, a protest was received from the ACLU of Maryland. On page 24, item 5, the correction is strike the consultant name Solid Rock Health Educators and replace it with Marquita Carey RN. The remainder of item 5 is unchanged. The Honorable Mayor Young will be abstaining on page 24, item 3, page 30, page 52, page 65, item 1. The Honorable President Scott will be abstaining on page 24, item 3, page 30, page 48, item 1, and page 52. The Honorable Comptroller will be abstaining on pages 44 and 45, page 48, item 1, pages 65 through 67. There are no abstentions for Acting City Solicitor Moore, and there are no abstentions for Acting Director of Public Works Garbark. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. I would direct the board members' attention to the memorandum from my office dated June 15, 2020, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items, together with any corrections and additions that have been noted by the comptroller. I will entertain a motion to approve all the items contained on the routine agenda.
Mr. President, I move approval of all of the items on the routine agenda.
I second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The motion carries. The routine agenda items have been adopted. The first item on the non-routine agenda can be found on page 7 through 9, Baltimore Development Corporation, Port Covington Tax Increment Financing Agreement. We have received a protest on this item. We will hear from the ACLU and then from the Baltimore Development Corporation. We're going to start with the ACLU. Please state your name and start your protest. Ms. Barbara Samuels.
Good morning, Mr. President. Can you hear?
No, Ms. Samuels, you're gone. We're going to give you a second to come back. Ms. Samuels, are you there?
Yes. Can
okay.
you hear me?
We can hear you now. There's some problems with your sound and video. Ms. Samuels? One second, you guys.
Hey, Mr. President, let her know that we don't need to see her face, or we can hear her when she don't show her face.
Yes. Ms. Samuels, we can neither hear you or see you, but if you just want to have your voice be heard, it might be easier to not have the video, but we can't see you or hear you, but we can see you now. Can you hear us, Ms. Samuels? Hold on for 1 second, guys. We're going to try to call them and tell them to call in.
Okay.
Just one more second, you guys. She's calling into the call-in number.
Mr. President, is she calling in?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good, Ms. Samuels. Go ahead.
Oh, goodness. Thank you. Hold on. Let me hang up the phone. Okay. Sorry about that. My lack of technical skills. Good morning, Mr. President, members of the Board of Estimates. Thank you for considering the protest that we filed regarding the Port Covington items. My name is Barbara Samuels. I'm the managing attorney for fair housing at the Maryland ACLU. And joining me is Charlie Carter, executive director of Step Up to Lead. Charlie was the leader of the Port 3 Coalition in 2016 and is one of the signatories, and her organization is, to our letter of protest. We filed this protest to ask that the Port Covington funding agreement and related agreements described on pages 7 to 9 of the Board of Estimates agenda be deferred or withdrawn, at least until a proper due diligence analysis is done to assess the financial viability of the Port Covington project in light of dramatically changed circumstances and also fundamentally changed deal structure that has greatly increased the city's risk and decreased the benefits of the project. We want to underscore that this is not the same project that the City Council authorized 4 years ago. It is not the same moment and environment as 4 years ago. And at that time, the Finance Department and BDC assured the Council that due diligence would be done before issuance of each tranche of bonds. The approval of this funding agreement and related documents that is now before you is that moment. So Ms. Carter, if she is on, is going to address how we got here, why that matters, and the need for transparency with the residents of Baltimore regarding the $660 million TIF that the city will be bound to for the next 40 years, long after the administration of anyone in office now, in fact, long after many of our lifetimes. So Charlie, if you're there, I would like to turn it over to you for a few comments.
Thank you, Barbara.
1 minute. Mr. President, would you ask Ms. Carter to say what organization she represents? Because I didn't get
Ms.
it.
Carter, you got to state your name for the record, even though Ms. Samuels did it already. State your name for the record, please.
Thank you. My name is Charlie Carter. I'm the executive director of Step Up to Lead, an organization that engages everyday citizens in participating in their government. As Ms. Samuel said, in 2016, more than 100 organizations representing community, labor, advocacy, and faith came together to challenge the Port Covington TIF. A year after the uprising over police brutality and underinvestment in Black and Brown communities, we thought the proposal was tone deaf and lacked the transparency and meaningful public input of the community. We questioned many of the financial assertions underpinning the deal and even hired an independent financial consultants to review the limited information the city released on the proposal. Those consultants then raised a series of concerns that were never addressed. Since that, over the 4 years, few issues have garnered so much public outrage and engagement of the community. And this issue remains a hotly debated issue and point of concern with the community. Now, here we are 4 years later, as protesters once again fill the inequity that continues to plague Baltimore. And once again, their concerns seem to be falling on deaf ears. So much has changed about our economy, about our society, about the financial viability of the Port Covington deal that we believe it would amount to malpractice for the body not to move, for this body to move forward with the approval, with moving forward and approving the issuance of $148 million in debt. It's at this point, and Barbara will go into the specifics, so much has changed about Under Armour, about Sagamore, about the structure of this deal. We believe that the public deserves to review what this will mean for the public and taxpayers going forward. We ask that you postpone this decision until due diligence can be done. And now I turn it over to Barbara, who can go into details.
Ms. Samuels, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So this, the funding agreement and the related funding agreements by agency of $148 million TIF bonds, part of the $660 million TIF that was approved by the City Council 4 years ago. Now, that TIF was front-loaded with city-funded costs, especially for horizontal development of infrastructure, with any return until year 20. So this is a really critical point to assess and to reassess, given the dramatic changes in circumstances. First, the City Council, let's talk about what the City Council did and did not do in 2016. They did not review the financials for this project. They did not approve the financials. They authorized the TIF district. The BDC and Finance said that the due diligence, the risk analysis for the city, the financial viability of the project would be assessed as each of 4 tranches of bonds came time to be issued. We are now at that moment where the first tranche of bonds is now before the Board of Estimates, but without an up-to-date due diligence being done, i.e. an analysis of the costs and benefits to the city, of the financial viability of the project, and of the risk to the city. And this is a dramatically different project than what was presented to and authorized by the City Council 4 years ago. And it's different in ways that increase the city's risks and reduce the returns and benefits. It's also a very different market and political environment, as we are in the midst of a health crisis, which has caused an economic crisis and a recession. We're in the midst of a crisis in government legitimacy, credibility, accountability, and approval of the bond issuance at this time would be completely out of step with the economy and market conditions, the pending changes in the demand for office space, retail, luxury housing, the city's financial position, the calls for racial equity and public investment, and the reality that Under Armour is struggling, laying off staff, not expanding its headquarters staff, and not building the headquarters campus at Port Covington that was really the catalyst and underpinning for the entire project. Even though the Under Armour campus was not within the TIF district, there is no question, there can be no question, that the campus was the catalyst upon which the entire project depended. So none of these changes, to our knowledge, based on any information that has been available to the public, and I would echo what Ms. Carter said about it being extremely difficult for the public to obtain any information about this project. But to our knowledge, none of this has been objectively evaluated to determine its obvious impact on the project. So the city has nothing to lose and everything to gain by conducting a thorough, up-to-date, and objective financial and risk analysis before proceeding with these items. The type of due diligence that we were told would happen before each tranche of bonds would be issued. The time for magical thinking about unrealistic job projections, revenue estimates, shiny headquarters, distilleries, architectural piers is over. The Board of Estimates is being asked to sign off on 40 years of debt service and foregone opportunities to invest in other parts of our city. And this is not the same project presented to the City Council. So most obviously, the Under Armour headquarters with its projected 10,000 jobs is gone. Sagamore is gone. Kevin Plank is apparently gone. The commitments for vertical development never materialized. According to documents that we obtained in December 2019, over 4 years, the developer has only been able to obtain verbal commitments for 3 small leases totaling only about 35,000 square feet compared to more than 1 million in office space that is contemplated. Apartments filled with creative millennials living in luxury apartments has been replaced in phase 1B of the plan by short-term rentals. The occupants of which will not be city residents, not pay piggyback tax to the city, one of the primary revenue streams expected to help defray the cost to the city. Over 4 years, no steps such as housing credit application have been submitted to create affordable housing. And if we look at the promise of jobs, in the first place, only 1/3 of those jobs were ever under the most optimistic projections to be going to city residents. And those were mostly low-paid, less than full-time retail and restaurant jobs. those kind of jobs are gone in the wake of COVID. We know that office space and is not going to be leased in the wake of COVID as more and more employers move to remote work for many of their employees. So the projections for Port Covington were always based on best case scenarios. And that was one of the arguments that we made, that our economists pointed out, that there was no sensitivity analysis done, or at least not made public, where you would look at and test best case scenarios, worst case scenarios, and then something, in the middle, a more likely scenario. What we saw was the best case scenario only. And now we face a worst case scenario that frankly is worse than any of us probably would have imagined at the time. So despite all the red flags and warning signs, if the Board of Estimates approves the funding agreement and Medco issues these bonds, what are we going to see? Well, first and foremost, we're going to see that Kevin Plank and Mr. Weller are going to be reimbursed off the top of the TIF proceeds for their costs to date. So for their costs of acquiring property like the Sun Plant, for their costs of lobbying the city council back in 2016, for their architectural or other legal costs. And then after those costs are reimbursed, the proceeds will be used for expensive horizontal infrastructure that will be installed with those proceeds, using the city's bond money to provide that public infrastructure. So what happens if the project continues to be stalled out? And if the market for luxury apartments, office space, restaurants, and retail does not materialize in the midst of a pandemic and a recession, then what we risk is that we will have what we have there now: infrastructure, expensive infrastructure installed at the cost to the city and at the risk of the city, with nothing to show for it. We will be left in the same position as in the 1980s, when a HUD 108 loan was used to put in the infrastructure at Port Covington, and all that resulted was the Sun printing plant and the Walmart, Sam's Club, and the Nick's Fish House. On the other hand, if the Board of Estimates defers, orders an objective financial and risk analysis of this project in light of its current deal structure, in light of the difficulties of Under Armour, in light of the changed economic circumstances, the city loses nothing. So we respectfully ask that you defer this item or withdraw it entirely, but at least defer it until a rigorous and objective due diligence can be done to protect the interests of the city and the interests of the residents of Baltimore. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Samuels. We will now hear from Colin Turbot from BBC.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Madam Comptroller, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning and provide facts on the Port Covington TIF and the three documents and agreements before you today.
Colin, can you go ahead and just, a little bit, please? Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Say something else, Colin. Sorry.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
You're good.
So I'm going to refer to the protest letter that was received yesterday, and then I'm happy to answer any questions and fill in any questions that the board may have. There was the protest received yesterday by the ACLU. A couple of the points that I want to clarify and provide the facts on. One, in terms of the public engagement, there's an assertion here that there has been no public information or meetings since the city council's approval. There's actually been 9 public meetings that have been held throughout 2018 and 2019. There were 7 meetings in 2019 to review different aspects of the project, all of which were public meetings. And the last of which was the Board of Finance approval, December 18th, 2019. And that the Board of Finance reviewed in detail the financials of the project and the financial analysis that was updated at that time. And all of those documents were provided in a public setting and also were available in detail on the website. And those documents and the recommendation to move forward with bond approval was unanimously approved by the Board of Finance at the end of 2019. So all of the financial analysis that's been discussed here has been updated and provided to the public as recently as December of 2019. In terms of some of the other assertions in here, in terms of the developer change, although the name has changed from Sagamore to Weller, all the principals and the project team remain the same. In terms of some of the comments about affordable housing, it says that there have been no applications submitted for state assistance on the low-income housing tax credit. That's not accurate. The developer submitted an application in June of 2019 and received approval for 4% LIHTC funding, which will provide 54 units in E6, which is over 20% affordable at 50% AMI. There are 89 affordable units in Chapter 1, not 73. And Chapter 1B will fulfill the obligations of the MOU, which is to provide at least 20% of affordable dwelling units on site. I also want to clarify some of the statements that have been made about the risk to the city taxpayers. That's not accurate at all. As we've discussed and presented many times publicly, the bonds are bought by investors, and the special taxing district is basically a mechanism to collateralize all of the private improvements to backstop the debt on the bonds. So these bonds are not backed by the full faith and credit of the city, and there's no risk to the city taxpayers. That's really borne by the bondholders and the private development. I just also wanted to note the significant community investment that's part of this project. Already there's been $10 million spent towards the MOU and the community benefits agreement. There's significant support from the 6 surrounding communities, which includes Cherry Hill and Westport, which are predominantly African-American communities. And also there's been already about $20 million awarded in MBE contracts and another $4 million to WBE contracts for the public infrastructure. I will pause there. I'm also joined by Keenan Rice of MuniCap, who's our city's financial advisor on this project, as well as Alan Cason, who is our outside bond counsel on this project, if there's any questions from the board.
Thank you, Colin. I actually do have a couple questions that I think will be great for you to talk about publicly. There's a lot being said has been said about the city being on the hook if things never come to pass. Can you talk about what protections are in place for the city if these bonds are issued and things don't happen the way that they're expected to happen? Can you walk us through exactly what protections are there for the city of Baltimore?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd be happy to do that. I'll explain it in layman terms, and if I if I misspeak, I'll ask that Keenan Rice and/or Alan to chime in and either clarify or add to it. Um, Basically, the project has a special taxing district that's codified in city council by the city council in city law, and what that sets up is in the event that there's not enough tax increment from the project to pay the bonds, the private developer, the private property owners must pay the special tax, which would fund the debt service on the bonds. So there's no city tax money being used to pay the difference if there's a shortfall in terms of the increment. If the property owners do not pay the special tax, those properties would then go into essentially foreclosure. The city would have the ability to acquire those properties and sell them in order to fund the special tax. The value of the improved property greatly exceeds the amount of debt service that's paid on the bond. So we've had this situation in the past where there's a special tax. In every case that we've had, the special tax has been paid by the private developer. There's been no issues. We've never had it go to the next step. From a practical standpoint, it would be very unlikely that that would occur because of the financial interest of the mortgage lender on those properties would typically step in and pay the special tax, because the amount of the special tax is far less than the value of the property, and the private sector is not going to risk losing their private property. I'll pause, and if Alan or Keenan want to add anything to that.
Mr. President, if I may, Alan Kaysen with McGuire Woods, 500 East Pratt Street. I think Colin covered it very nicely. I did want to just emphasize that these are Medco issued bonds. So the actual debt obligation is a debt obligation of Medco and not the mayor and city council of Baltimore. The city's obligation in this deal is under the contribution agreement, which is part of your package today. And what that simply says, boiled down, is that to the extent that there are new property taxes generated from the new development or special taxes, as Colin just mentioned, those revenues will be used to pay debt service through Medco. So unlike what is mentioned in this protest with regard to CDBG and HUD loans, this is a totally different type of transaction. It's what we call a limited obligation, payable only from new taxes generated by the new development. That is the only obligation. The city, to the extent that that happens, has to collect those funds and pay them to Medco for debt service.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Colin, just another follow-up. We know that the world has changed since February with COVID-19. Can you talk about how you guys and what you guys have done to look at this project in light of the change in economic forecast for the entire world, not just Baltimore?
Sure, and I also want to note that this project is looked at as a long-term project. It's a 20, 30-year project, and so you're going to have different economic cycles throughout a project of this magnitude, and you're going to adjust accordingly. In terms of COVID, obviously it's a very recent change in economics, so it's a little difficult to predict whether office space is going to, come back or not come back. What we can say is that this agreement to move forward will solidify the city's position in supporting this project. It was mentioned that there haven't been any leases that are signed. It's very hard for a private company to sign a lease until they're satisfied that the public improvements are going to be contributed to the project and that the developer has that in place to move forward. So it's a little chicken or egg. But we don't see any significant changes to the project at this time. There's been adjustments along the way. One was mentioned about the housing, the short-term rental. That was actually a planned response to some of the feedback that they were getting from potential corporate lessees, where they wanted to have that option in addition to a hotel if they have executives or staff coming in for a longer period of time that might not want to be in a hotel. So we continue to evaluate the impact on the Port Covington project related to whether it's COVID or other economic changes. But I can say that this is a long-term project, and the vision for the long-term future for this project, especially the first chapter, hasn't changed dramatically. But they're going to need to make those adjustments, and this is the final step for the city in order to move the project forward. But as the bonds are issued and those investors are looking at the bonds, the developer is going to have to make sure that they address those questions in terms of economics. So ultimately, the market will dictate what is built in terms of if there's a changes because of COVID, and it'll also dictate the sale of the bonds. But all indications that we've seen to date, nothing has changed significantly in terms of the investment.
Thank you, Colin. And last question for me, just can you go into a little more detail, because we know there's a lot of conversation about and a lot of mixing the conversation about this project and Under Armour and Under Armour's viability, creating impacting the viability of this project. Can you talk about that in layman's terms for the citizens who are watching about how Under Armour will impact this project or not moving forward?
Sure. So obviously, Under Armour does have a strong presence there now. There's 2 buildings on site, one of which is full with Under Armour employees. The project was never contingent on Under Armour expanding or building the full campus. The project is underwritten based on the mixed-use development that's projected in the different phases of the project, none of which have specific Under Armour office space. I think Under Armour, it kind of went both ways. Under Armour was an amenity for the development, and the development was an amenity for the Under Armour campus. But the two are exclusive of one another in terms of project financing and viability. So we're certainly hopeful that Under Armour will continue to grow and stay and expand in the city. And that was, as remarked, that was part of the genesis of the project. But it was also the opportunity to take 200 acres of vacant waterfront property that had been underutilized, as was mentioned by big box retail, and turn it into a vibrant, mixed-use, connected community that also benefits the adjacent communities, which tremendous amount of work has been done. So whether Under Armour expands or builds the full build out of the headquarters isn't necessarily relevant or contingent for the project as we've seen it designed to move forward. We believe that companies are going to be excited to move to Port Covington and move to Baltimore City, regardless of whether Under Armour's full campus is built out. But they obviously are a major component already and will continue to be a major component of Port Covington with the existing campus footprint in Port Covington.
Thank you. Any questions from other board members for Mr. Talbert?
I don't have any questions, Mr. President, but I would like to state some comments for the record.
Comptroller, do you want to state them? We have one more speaker. Do you want to state them after? Yeah.
After. Yes, after.
There's also Mr. Mike Middleton from Cherry Hill, whose neighborhood is impacted by the project, who would like to speak. Mr. Middleton?
Yes, am I heard?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mike.
Good morning, Mr. President and members of the Board of Estimate. My name is Michael Middleton, and I am Executive Director of of the, Cherry Hill Development Corporation and president of the board of directors of SB7, or the 6 communities with Port Covington, regarding the Port Covington development. First of all, obviously, I'd like to speak in favor of the bill. And I'd like to raise some concerns to the members of the.
Excuse me, Mr. President, there's some background, which is gonna be hard to transcribe. Can you?
Yeah, Mr. Middle, can you cut your TV off in the background? Uh-oh, now we lost the sound. Mr. Middleton?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but there's feedback. There's feedback on your end. Do you have the stream up somewhere?
I probably do.
Well, you got to find that stream and end that stream so that we can, the comptroller's office can transcribe what you're saying.
Sure. So obviously under
I don't-
does have a strong presence there now. There's 2 buildings on site, one of which is full of Under Armour employees. The project was never contingent on Under Armour.
Yeah, that's Colin.
We're trying to get help him cut that off, you guys. That's why we have him muted for 1 second.
And the problem is he's.
Mr. Middleton, can you hear us now?
No, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
All righty. So again, I apologize. And getting directly to the point, Mr. President, I received the opponent's letter of opposition just late yesterday, and I'm sorry I could not respond more formally. My first question comes that where were these organizations over the past 4 years since the TIP program or the TIP project was passed? Each of the signatories on this letter in opposition are individuals who I know, some of which personally, or some I know of their work. Not one of those individuals who signed on this list has been in the South Baltimore communities who are most affected by this proposal. Not one. Not to a community meeting, not to any community engagement process of which the Cherry Hill Development Corporation had spent substantial resources, not to one open meeting for SB7. So for whom do they speak? I know of none of these organizations working within the South Baltimore communities, the communities who have long suffered for lack of resources coming into this community. And where I recognize that these individuals are advocates on behalf of the poor, they have not spoken with the poor they propose to represent. The people in the South Baltimore community have been working actively with Weller Development and with the Port Covington development team. This has been done through setting out goals and objectives, of which only these funds can assist us with. I am, and just excuse, I guess, my passion at this time, but I'm outraged that at this moment, not one telephone call has come to our community or to me to express the opposition that's in this letter. I have not seen or talked with any of these individuals, with the exception of Mr. Nat Helm, who I've worked on several housing or affordable housing types of projects. I am outraged. I don't know for whom they speak, unless it's for themselves. These are the same, or some of the same issues that were raised at the original hearings for the TIP program. I understand that they may be opposed to development coming into Baltimore, I'm outraged that the very communities that need this type of support, low income, African American communities themselves who are trying to lift themselves up, who are trying to work and to improve their conditions, all of a sudden are opposed again by the signatories on this document. Period. We have, if we set out certain goals in order to improve our communities. I don't expect that Port Covington will do it for us, but to work with us. I don't expect that any organization will do things for our communities, but I expect that those who purport to have our interests at heart will at least make a meeting, come to an engagement or community engagement process. None of our communities have heard of these organizations coming into our communities. None have asked. I asked where all of a sudden this passion for what is going on in Port Covington, where has it been for the past 4 years? A telephone call is a simple thing to do, or even to show up at a meeting that you're so concerned about. I submit to this body and to those individuals who have signed this document that the work and the technical assistance, an initial $1 million have been given to our organization. The rest of the funding that we're relied upon all depends upon the passing of this particular bill or the issue before the board at this time. We in our community need this bill. We have been looking forward to funds coming from this Port Covington development. I ask that if the interest is so great, come to our communities, live with the poor that's here. But in the meantime, to take a quote, take your knee off our necks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Middleton. Madam Comptroller.
Yes, I just, although I am in favor of this item, I want to just state some concerns that I have for the record. As we all know, COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the commercial real estate market in Baltimore and everywhere else in the country and the world. I've heard from many business and corporate owners who are saving money by having their employees telework and the employees prefer working at home. And with lease commitments for only about 39,000 square feet out of a 1.1 million square feet at Port Covington, the developer has a long way to go to meet what may likely be a shrinking demand for office space. I also urge the developer to dedicate a higher portion of Phase 1B to affordable housing units on the Port Covington site and not put those units elsewhere in the city. In 2016, I voted against the MOU of Port Covington because I felt the developer's commitment for affordable housing, local hiring, and minority participation were not strong enough. And as a result of subsequent discussions at that time, the Department of Audits will be carefully monitoring compliance in these areas when the project goes forward. It is imperative for the city to make sure that this project benefits all the citizens of Baltimore as much as possible. So I'm going to cast my vote in favor of this TIF agreement today, relying on the assurance from the Department of Finance that the bonds will be issued only once the developer has its bank financing in place and has met all the city's requirements. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you there. Being no more comment about this item, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. President, I would move that the probe test be denied and that we move to vote in favor. And I'd like to acknowledge that the protest is well heard. At its base, though, it appears that they purport to speak for a community with whom they've not actually spoken. And that is of great concern. That very much weakens the protest. We are at a time where it's critical that we speak with one another, not just for one another. And in the absence of that direct communication, anyone who fails should and would be perceived as not credible. Therefore, I move that the protest be denied and that the bond be awarded.
I second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I will, before casting my vote, I want to say a few words.
Aye, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before casting my votes, I want to make a brief statement. I was briefed on this item in February. However, I did not know that it would appear on today's agenda until the draft agenda was released on Friday. That's not the process and how the process should look for a project of this magnitude. And also, let me start off by saying that we have to, moving forward, we have to understand that TIFs and projects like these are not a comprehensive economic development strategy and will never replace one. We have seen our way of life change during COVID-19. Our city faces uncertain financial outlooks. The world does. We shouldn't be aspiring to return to normal because normal wasn't good enough, and we have to be more accountable with our public dollars. Moving forward, we need to see, and we will see, greater transparency with regard to this agreement, its status, how the project is moving. The residents of Baltimore should understand exactly what this agreement is and how they stand to benefit from it. What we heard today in the protest is important and valuable. What we heard from Mr. Middleton is extremely important and valuable. And it's also on the record. I want to be clear again that moving forward, I am going to hold everyone accountable to every dollar, every agreement, everything that we say is going to happen in this project, because Baltimore can't afford to have it fail, and that we have to be better on how we are being more transparent with these kind of processes and cannot have things work and operate that the way the process has happened here today. And based on that vote, I'm going to vote no today. Thank you. The item is approved. The second item on the non-routine agenda can be found on page 51, Department of Audit's Baltimore Police Department Biennial Performance Audit Report. Mr. Auditor, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, and board members. My name is Josh Pash. I am the city auditor. I am presenting the Baltimore Police Department Biennial Performance Audit Report for fiscal years ended June 30th, 2019 and 2018. I'd like to thank the Baltimore Police Department and the audit team for their efforts in completing this audit. The objectives of our performance audit were to, number one, determine whether the Baltimore Police Department met its performance measure targets. Number two, evaluate whether the police department had adequately designed internal controls related the selected performance measures, and three, to follow up on prior findings issued in the Biennial Performance Audit Report dated December 24th, 2018. The selected performance measures for this audit were service 627, percent of priority 1 calls for service dispatched to officers in less than 60 seconds. Service 634, percentage of costs reimbursed by event organizers for which Baltimore Police Department bills, and service 635, percent of recruits who successfully completed training with a grade of 85 or higher. 2018, service 627 and 634 selected performance measures met the target. For service 627, our validation of the supporting documentation shows a different percentage. We calculated 40%, whereas the police department reported 54%. For service 634, we were not able to validate the actual results for both 2018 and 2019 because the police department was not able to provide us with the adequate documentation. We have the following findings related to this audit for the current year. For service 627, the emergency communications should reevaluate the current performance measure criteria of less than 60 seconds dispatch priority 1 calls to officers. The target for the performance measure the data analysis indicates that 60 seconds criteria appeared not to be reasonable. More than 50% of calls were routed after 1 minute or longer. Also, targets for the performance measure were set low. The targets were adjusted annually. For example, in 2018, the target was reduced from 90% to 15%. However, the adjusted targets are still significantly lower than the actual results. In addition, in the budget book, there was no explanation of why the targets were adjusted. We recommend that the police department develop and implement formal, written, approved, and dated policies and procedures to document the reasons for setting and changing performance measures and targets, and to maintain documentation to support the actual results reported in the budget books, and also to periodically evaluate and assess the existing performance measures for reasonableness, and also to include any explanations for changes in the budget book. For findings 2 and 3 were for Service 634. The crowd, traffic, and special events management was not able to provide supporting documentation, and we were unable to validate the 2018 and 2019 actual results. In addition, there are no written policies and procedures to guide employees to track, monitor, and performance measure, or to maintain adequate documentation. Personnel in the current roles are not aware of the performance measure. They are not tracking, monitoring, and reconciling amounts collected or not collected to determine whether the performance measure was achieved. The Baltimore Police Department is not recovering the actual cost for police coverage at special events. The city currently bills these special events at flat rates, and the rates were set many years ago and are not close to the actual rates. So our recommendation is to periodically evaluate and analyze the appropriateness of the approved rates so that we are meeting the objectives of the program. We also recommend that Department of Finance coordinate with the police department to monitor payments received from special event organizers. The way the process works is police department prepares a bill and finance bills and is in charge of collecting the money, and that the police department is not involved in collecting the money. We also recommend to develop formal procedures that they will identify at least responsible parties, method of tracking and reconciling and monitoring, reporting, performance measure, and data retention. And then also to maintain the required supporting documentation. For findings 4 and 5, which was for Service 635, the training records and certification unit does not have an efficient process to track, monitor, and report the performance measure. The majority of the training records and certification unit processes and procedures are manually performed, which is a large task because of the number of recruits that they have. Also, we noted the training records and certification unit does not have written policies and procedures to provide guidance and direction to employees for tracking, monitoring, and reporting the performance metrics, as well as to maintain the documentation. We also identified a security risk in Power DMS, which is their tracking system. Not all users have a unique identification to log into Power DMS. This is a security risk that information can be accessed and or intentionally or unintentionally altered. Our recommendation is to automate the processes for tracking, monitoring, reporting, and maintaining the performance measure data so that it supports the actual results reported in the budget books. Document those processes, communicate the policies and procedures to the recruitment and training division people, to evaluate policies and procedures and related controls to reflect any changes in processes, and create unique user identification and proper access restrictions in their tracking system. We also did follow up on prior year findings. The prior year finding for Service 622, police patrol, percentage of time patrol officers spend on proactive policing, and Service 635, police recruiting and training, the number of recruits hired, their written policies and procedures were not up to date and were not written and finalized. Our recommendation was to develop and implement written policies and procedures. The assessment was it was not implemented. The police department responded that they're in the process of updating those, and we also noted that these are a requirement of the consent decree. For Service Center 622, police patrol, and Service 623 and 624, crime investigation, target violent crimes service, and 635, police recruiting and training, we identified in the past that supporting documentation did not support actual amounts, and we, following up, that those were not implemented. We found that the supporting documentation did not agree to the metrics that were being published. We noted in Service Center 623 and 624 under Crime Investigations, Target Violent Crimes, the budget contains performance metrics and targets organized by service area. However, there's no clear documentation to how the performance metrics are determined. We discussed this with the police department, and they are in discussions of revamping and overhauling all of the performance metrics. And we did see evidence that they're having those discussions with BBMR. However, we did notice that none of those changes have been implemented in the scorecard or in the budget book as of the date of the audit report. And so we noted that as partially implemented. We noted that in the past, of 51 performance metrics that were identified, 49% were output metrics. Output metrics do not help determine efficiency or effectiveness. They basically count how many items occurred. We discussed this with the police department, and they had mentioned that this is another metric which they are evaluating to no longer continue these metrics. And we did see evidence that they met with BBMR, but those meetings and those changes have not become effective. We noted that there is a disconnect between metrics such as the police patrol service area, where the metric doesn't support any of the initiatives of the police department and appears just to be captured in the budget book. And we recommend that the police department review the current metrics and update them. And the police department identified this as also one which they are including in their overall overhaul of performance metrics. We noted in the prior year that for Service 635, police recruiting and training, that the performance metrics, number of completed applications received and number of recruits hired was not met. We evaluated to see if the additional efforts put in those were successful. We found that those metrics have been achieved in the current year review. That concludes. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Auditor. Is anyone from the police department on?
Good morning, Honorable President and board members. This is Charlotte Graham. I'm the CFO.
Yes, ma'am. Just want to hear from the department about the auditor's report before we ask questions.
Yes, of course. This is something we take very seriously. As we're trying to create accountability and transparency. Our first phase was getting the budget to represent reality and making sure the numbers represent what we do. Our second phase of cleanup is actually the performance measures. So we recognize too that we are already beginning to overhaul all of these measures. We want everything to be in writing, to have good policies and procedures. So we're beginning this, we've actually already begun this phase, and some of these findings we've already self-identified before the auditors too, and they're all underway. For instance, in special events, you will see in the budget that we put forward for fiscal year 2021 that we've made efficiency adjustments in the budget for special events, and that's preempting some of these recommendations from the audit, and we're working with the Mayor's Office and BBMR to implement rate changes. We've also been meeting over the last couple of months with the Department of Finance to change our procedures so that the Baltimore Police Department can be more involved in the billing and ensure that we're recovering the money from policing these secondary employment jobs. So we do take all of this very serious, and we've already begun corrective action. And it was a pleasure to work with the audits department. They were wonderful, and we're excited to overhaul our performance measures. So thank you.
Thank you, this is a question that either you can answer. Mr. Auditor, when you were doing your audit, were you able to see when exactly was the last time that those rates for special events were changed and updated?
We actually were not able to identify the date. I believe we found it was over 6 or 7 years, but we tried to hammer down a specific date of when they were last approved. The rates are up to 50% different from the actual rates, sometimes more. So we noticed that the time for a review is it's a good time.
Thank you. And Ms. for you, can you walk us through the prior year findings that the auditor found, and those that were not implemented, and tell us where we are in those?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. You were breaking up. Was that question for me for the police department?
Yes, I just want to just a quick response on where you guys are on implementing the prior year findings that we're still not implementing. We have policies that needed to be updated. All of those things, those are critically important.
Yes, of course. And obviously, a lot of those findings go back as far as 2016. Yes, so our first phase is basically looking at all the measures, making sure that we have good measures in place, and then documenting all of them in writing and making sure we have policies and procedures so there's consistency in how the measure is used. And also we plan on providing an extensive training plan so that these board members understand the value of these measures and how these measures are used as we look at the budget and making sure that we're getting a return on our investment. So some of them are underway, but a lot of them is going to be part of this comprehensive evaluation that we've already started of evaluating our measures.
Thank you. Madam Controller?
Yes. Ms. Graham, how long will it take you to report back to the board for the updated flat rate salary, the flat rate billing?
Yes, of course. That's a wonderful question. You should actually see something coming your way here in the next month or so, coming back to the BOE that we present to you of a rate change. So that is heading your way. Obviously, that is a collaborative initiative with the Mayor's Office and BBMR.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Auditor, I have one last question for you. In reference to the issue with our DMS, can you talk about, and maybe you can talk about what the department's response was to that particular finding?
Yes. The department's response was they have a outline and an action plan to replace some of their training systems, and they have agreed to implement unique user IDs so that those can be better controlled. And let me just right, in 2019, an updated digital recruit testing platform was adopted to replace a former Scantron-based testing procedures. We looked at that, so we see that there's progress in there. And they have currently, the way that they calculate test scores, the calculation is automated, but then the consolidation is digital. And they're looking at having the system do those calculations, accumulate that, so that everyone will have a more up-to-date and quick responses. And they are looking to fully automate all aspects of testing and reporting for their testing management system. They don't have a solid time frame. The costs to implement those new systems have not been approved by the Board of Estimates. And so we didn't have a solid date. We did see an overall action plan there. And that was one of the reasons why we marked it as partially implemented. And currently they don't have a known implementation date based on the open factors such as budget and the procurement.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board members? Thank you. The audit report has been noted. As there's no more business before the board, we will recess until bid opening at 12 noon. We will also reconvene on June 24th, 2020. Thank you for tuning in. Please stay safe, everyone.
All right. Good afternoon. The Board of Estimates is now in session for the receiving and opening of bids. In accordance with the directives of the mayor and the governor prohibiting gatherings of more than 10 people, and as part of the overall effort to limit transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the Board of Estimates is conducting bid openings remotely. Members of the public can call in to listen to bid openings live by calling 443-984-1696 and entering access code 0817325. Board of Estimates meetings are also broadcast live on Charm TV, Channel 25 on Comcast Cable in Baltimore City. Meetings are also streamed on the internet at www.charmtv.baltimore.com/watch-live. The Board of Estimates will continue to conduct bid openings remotely while the state of emergency declared by the Mayor of Baltimore and the Governor of Maryland remains in effect. The first item we have is from the Department of Recreation and Parks, RP 18824, renovations to the Towanda Recreation Center with a bid bond. Also, addendum received for 6/17/2020. There are no addenda that have been received for June 17, 2020. So let's see what we have here. The first item is Keller Brothers, Inc. With a bid bond. Total dollar amount is, do you see a page?
269.
Total dollar amount is, on the first page? Oh, on the first page. The total dollar amount is $618,400. $618,400.
It's on page 269.
I was going to write $269.
No.
The next bidder is Boulevard Contractors Corp. Total dollar amount with a bid bond. Total dollar amount is $445,200. $445,200. The next bidder is
Pacunis.
Pronounce it?
Pacunis.
Pacunis. Pacunis Construction Company, Inc. With a bid bond. Total dollar amount, $586,144. $586,144. The next bidder is, North Point Builders of Maryland, LLC. With a bid bond. Total dollar amount, $593,800. $593,800. The next bidder is Bob Andrews Construction, Inc. You see it? Here we go. This is it on 313. Look at 313. with a bid bond. Total dollar amount, $582,763. $582,763. And the last one is Binsky Construction Company, LLC. With a bid bond. Total dollar amount, $570,000. $570,000.
Okay, these will all be referred to the Department of Recreation and Parks for their review.
There being no more business before this board, it is now adjourned. Okay, you got a minute?
Yeah.